Father by Nim P. Pseudo. Chapter 8, Part 2. As I plummeted into the canyon, black bubbles streamed from my chest like the trail of a shooting star. Though pulsing shadow obscured my vision, I saw a spire rushing up to intercept me. Before I collided and dashed to pieces, the material of my cloak transformed, becoming membranous and sheathed in light. I flapped with all my strength, sweeping my transient wings to one side and altering the trajectory. Wind roared as I grazed the spire's edge, and pain sheared across my shoulder. With a kick and another flap, I amended my course. My wings soon shriveled, and my glide returned to a fall. I pierced the canopy, and branch after branch buffeted me. Their sharp edges scratched my mask and tattered my reforming cloak. I landed without elegance, tumbling into a cluster of ferns and coming to a stop. But no sooner had I stilled than I rose to my feet. The brand of driest dictum was seared into my shell, and I could not resist it. I set off in search of a creature to devour me. In contrast to the cliffs above, the canyon floor was glutted with life, both plant and fungal. Thick shrubbery and nests of vines occupied the spaces where light could be found, while carpets of mushrooms took up the darker stretches. Overhead, sprouting from craggy slopes on the spires, were the tall, stalked plants that made up the canopy. Between them flitted winged bugs in many shapes and sizes. Some paused to regard me, venom dripping from their bright orange abdomens. Spores rose like fog banks as I trudged over fungi, and stray leaves clung to my cloak as I pushed through bushes. I passed even more bugs as I went, but they were far too small to consume me. The insubstantial leash tugging at my neck eventually brought me to a clearing occupied by mask flies. They flinched at my appearance and took flight in a spiraling arrangement before vanishing into a hole in the canopy. At the center of the clearing was a cavity of stone, within which rested a crystal pure pool of water. I skirted its edge, but a metallic flash caught my attention. I stopped, held fast by something. Beneath the perfect stillness of the water rested an object, unnatural in such a setting. It was a nail, the very nail that Ogrim had flung off the cliff minutes before. I quivered in place, strung between Dry's imperative and another long forgotten. "Take the nail, little one." Though the leash of Dry's will strained against me, I shuffled down the slope of the cavity and splashed into the chilling pool. It was not deep, and the nail's hilt came easily to my grip. I kept it close to my side as I left the clearing. My wet steps smacked across the stone. I was directed ever downward and toward the heart of the canyon. Light became less and less frequent, forcing plant life to give way to fungus and rot. Pale, root-like things began to appear in the soil. They sported bulbs at their tips, which cast a ghostly glow upon the unnatural night. Creatures skittered and hissed beyond the reach of those bulbs, but their noises were meager and furtive. They were unfit to fulfill my task. I continued onward, heedless of the long gulfs of darkness through which I walked. But weakness crept upon me, like frost over the petals of a flower. Strands of ebony smoke wept from the wound in my chest. My legs shuddered with every step, and spinous vines rendered the path treacherous. As a matter of inevitability, I faltered and fell at a dip in the canyon floor. The dip extended into a slope, and the slope into a fissure. I crashed through putrid underbrush and slime-coated mushrooms. The walls of the fissure protruded like broken teeth, and I ricocheted all the way down. With a crunch of chitin, I came to a stop. For a time I could not rise. The world seemed to quake beneath me, and animation would not return to my limbs. From the scope of my vision, it appeared that I rested in a cavity of soil and loose rock. The wan caress of those glowing bulbs illuminated my surroundings. Beneath me and within the walls, tiny, spike-covered bugs squirmed over one another with a pointless urgency. Slowly, feeling crawled its way back into my body, and I pushed up to arm's length. A scrap of moon-white shell fragment fell from the cheek of my mask, yet that scrap did not belong to me. Though I was wounded, my mask was still unbroken. I stood, and more scraps thumped upon the soil, falling from my chest and cloak. Something had broken my fall, and in the process broken itself. I looked down. The tangled strips of a steel-gray cloak, the shattered remnants of 2 curved horns, the stump of a nail devoured by rust, and the umbral stain of what had once been a body, so much like mine. Out of these remains stared one unblinking eye socket, the only distinguishable remnant of a mask. The spike-covered bugs writhed and threshed through the pearly shell fragments, taking them up in their mandibles and grinding them to powder with sedulous attention. A voice, unbidden, rose from the incomprehensible tendrils of the past. "That thing is no consequence to you. It is mere refuse." And again my purpose ensorcelled me. I strode over the corpse and did not look back. The fissure was deep, far deeper than my innervated body could surmount. Not even a sliver of natural light reached down from above. Yet ahead, a passage peeked out of the cavity wall. It was little more than a crack lined with fungus, but it foretokened progress. With difficulty, I squeezed through and into the crushing embrace of the earth. Every step forward was a labor. The scrape and toil of my movements rebounded back at me, for the walls were barely wider than my shell. Stagnation hung heavy, as if the ash coating the land above had seeped down and become the very air about me. My cloak caught on jagged corners, my horns bashed against low-hanging stalactites. At times it felt as if my body would rip in two as I forced through jaw-like openings in the earth. Yet I could not stop. Though half-blind and panting, I spied something in the distance. Beyond a bend in the earthen labyrinth stood a beacon, a gap in the wall through which spilled sickly light. I hastened forward, abraded my shell upon talons of stone, and finally tore free of the tunnel's clutches. I emerged into a crater with steep, towering walls. It resembled the upturned mouth of some enormous parasite, perfectly circular, and with triangular shelves of stone jutting along its edge like teeth. Farther above, the green of the canopy shrouded the gray sky. On the far side of the crater was a cave entrance. Littered about it were the hulks of dead creatures. Their shells bore puncture wounds, and what remained of the flesh upon their bodies was desiccated and shrunken. Within the cave a foul wind blew, expanding and receding in a slow cadence. The leash of my command grew taut. I had found the object of my journey. The heat rose in me, and I approached the cave, every step faster than the last. Though the only sound I made was the hiss of my cloak, the wind within the cave stilled. A sequence of tremors disturbed the earth, and a presence revealed itself. 2 eyes, lividly orange, emerged from the dark, and with them came the plated form of a gargantuan bug. 6 legs, vestigial wings, and a nail-shaped proboscis greeted me. I beheld a hopper, many dozen times larger than the one Dryia had slain. It fixed the molten liquid of its gaze on me and approached. The ground beneath it buckled and cracked like the surface of a frozen lake. As the hopper drew close, the finer details of its body became clear. Old cuts, bite marks, and abrasions tarnished its armor. The wings upon its back were nothing but shredded flaps, and a hairline fracture ascended its proboscis, reaching all the way to the eye socket. The hopper's front right leg had been severed at an upper joint, causing it to list with every hop. Yet it still maneuvered around the heap of its victims with a semblance of finesse. The bulk of its body cast a shadow that stretched ravenously toward me. But fear was no birthright of mine, and I careened into a sprint, erasing the distance between us. Such was the demand placed upon me. The hopper did not bellow or screech. Aside from the crunch of stone, its only noise was strenuous breathing. As I entered its range, the hopper slid to a halt and gathered its legs beneath it. With a snapping noise that resembled splintering shellwood, the hopper leapt into the air. It angled its pointed limbs at me and dropped like a boulder. I did not brandish my nail. I did not tense and prepare to dodge. I did not draw from the well of soul within me. I merely waited. in anticipation of my task's end. But as the terrible weight descended, a smear of color swept down from the crater's edge. I was struck, not by the piercing proboscis of the hopper, but by something soft and warm. Fuzzy limbs wrapped me, and I was spirited into the sky. There was a deafening crash beneath me as the hopper landed and imprinted a second, smaller crater into the first. As I soared on delicate wings not my own, the leash of my purpose pulled at me. Of all the creatures in the canyon, that hopper alone could fulfill my goal, yet I was traveling away from it. Fatigue rendered me sluggish and impotent, but I pushed against the thing keeping me aloft. I needed, above all else, to return to the crater so that I might be devoured.
"Settle down, valiant larva,"
whispered a soft, winged voice above me.
"Be still. Should you fuss, then I might drop you, and we cannot have that."
The leash snapped. As a dozen commands before it, Dry's edict was lost to me with but the passage of a few antithetical words. I stilled, letting the pain and weariness loose from the cage in which I had bound it. The winged thing chuckled.
"There we are, much better. You might care to rest. We are nearly free of the matron's den."
A few flaps and an easy glide brought us above the crater's rim. All around stretched the private ecosystem of the canyon, dispersed with similar craters, like marks upon a damaged shell. The winged thing gripped me tightly and returned to the earth in a helical motion. We alighted on one of the huge stone wedges that encircled the hopper's crater. The winged thing flapped one last time to stabilize itself, and fine ruby-hued powder parted from its wings to sparkle away on the breeze. I was released from the cushioned embrace with a gentle nudge, but the new mandate of stillness that had been placed upon me paralyzed my limbs, and I collapsed into a heap. The winged thing made an alarmed noise.
"Oh dear, are you all right? Has exhaustion overtaken you? At the least sit up if you can. I must ensure that you aren't hurt."
I lifted my body from the cold rock and crossed my legs. Despite everything, the nail was still with me. I rested it on my lap and looked up. The winged thing was a moth, with multifaceted obsidian eyes and pronounced antennae shaped like the fronds of a fern. Something like fur draped its entire body, in alternating hues of pinks and whites that clashed with the drabness of our surroundings. The moth reached up to tug at the tips of its wings and pulled them inwardly in an overlapping pattern. In a few seconds, the wings came to resemble a stiff sort of cloak, and the moth sat down beside me. Stripes of fuchsia and cream mingled in a manner that could be called beautiful.
"You recover quickly," the moth said. "That is a good sign."
It looked me up and down, from the scrapes on my horns to the nail in my lap, to the dirt caking my feet. At the sight of my chest, the moth cringed.
"That is a ghastly wound you bear. Is the pain dire?"
But I did not reply.
"Perhaps I am being impertinent," the moth said. "I will begin with introductions."
It lowered its head in a grave gesture.
"I am called Seer, of the moth tribe. What is your name?"